When playing the original Call of Duty Zombies games like Black Ops 1, World at War, and even Black Ops 2 to an extent, they all share a very common theme, and that's they're pretty scary, at least when compared to their modern counterparts. And this sort of got me wondering why the game developers sort of chose to make these games less scary or just creepy as time progressed. Or are the developers of the games taking an artistic approach that differs from what the original games had, being a lot less scary and creepy? Now this question really created two sub-questions in my mind, and it's that, do these games seem less scary now because when we played them originally we were a lot younger? I remember when I first played Black Ops 1 Zombies, I was like 5 or 7 years old, so obviously it's going to seem a lot more scary to someone who's that age. Or is it both? Are the developers both striving away from a creepy aesthetic and we also have grown up, so it naturally just seems less scary? Well, I hope to kind of go into that in today's video. Now this might seem a little stupid to some of you guys, but my inspiration for this video was actually two TikToks I got on my For You page. The first one being a scary sort of edit of Kino der Toten. Now honestly, I attribute most of the scariness of this video to the ominous music it plays in the background. If you play it without music, it's really not scary. It's just more of a slideshow of Kino, but it sort of brought out a core memory, I guess you could say, in my head of remembering back when playing this as a kid. I remember seeing this and thinking like, oh my god, this is how this felt. A lot of people in the comments section also said they felt a very similar way when seeing the video. And the second video I saw on TikTok was made by the same guy, and this one probably resonated with me the most because I remember Moon in particular scared me so much as a kid compared to any other map. When the video cuts to the sort of space guy that wanders around Moon, that like really brought out a memory because I remember being so scared of him as a kid because he would just wander around slowly and would just like grab onto you. I don't know, it just like really freaked me out as a kid. And also people in this video's comment section also said it made them feel like a very similar way. And these two videos alone really sent me down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out like why these games in particular seem so scary back then, but the new ones now just don't feel the same. And let's start by asking the first question, and that's just that, did the developers just take a different art direction where these games became a lot less scary as they made new ones? My answer to this question is yes, and that's that the Zombies devs have really strayed away from the original sort of feel and made it a lot less scary. However, I think this answer goes a lot deeper than just that. And what I mean by this is, if you take a look at the most recent Call of Duty Black Ops 6, in my opinion, it's very mediocre on all fronts. It's not a bad game, but it's definitely not a great one. Zombies is no exception to this. One of the biggest critiques of the Zombies game mode from this game since day one was how bland and just bad the Zombies map looked. And this map I'm playing on, Liberty Falls, is no exception to this. It looks like it could be a multiplayer Warzone or campaign map. It looks like it just isn't in Zombies at all. Zombies maps are very dark, somewhat, I guess, scary. I don't want to throw that word around too much, but they're very brutal in their map design. And a map being dark doesn't necessarily mean the map has to take place at night. I'll actually get into a map that takes place during the day and still manages to keep this dark theme, and it was one of the more recent Call of Duties even. This map is the complete opposite of that. Other than having a few maybe destroyed buildings, it just looks like a campaign or like multiplayer map, and even then those maps have a few destroyed buildings in them as well. Probably it's a Call of Duty game. This map has no art design whatsoever, and it honestly just doesn't even feel like a Zombies map. Moving on to a Zombies map in Black Ops 6 that was just released, Citadel de Morts, I think that's how you pronounce that. And honestly, it does have more theming, I'll give it that. It doesn't just look like a very basic town, it's more medieval and has a more like Stone Age aesthetic to it. Other than its very generic theming, nothing about it screams it's a Zombies map. There's no brutal art style. I guess you could call it dark, but it's not really when you compare it to other maps. And again, my point of this map could easily just be put into multiplayer. Not that the map would function well as a multiplayer map, but the aesthetics of it would, or campaign even, still really stand up with this. It doesn't seem like an exclusively Zombies map. And I keep throwing around the word brutal aesthetic or like brutal art design. I kind of want to tell you what I mean by that. Look at this image of Mob of the Dead. There's a lot of design choices like barbed wire, the hanging bodies, the chains being wrapped around the roof, or the boarded up windows, the thrashed grounds, the bloodstains. It all sort of screams that you're in a zombies game or some horror oriented location. Even when you're outside, it's foggy and dark. And while this doesn't necessarily have to be the case for every zombies map, it really drives the dark feeling and aesthetic of a game. And that's my major critique with newer zombies titles. The maps, like in this case, Citadel de Morts, has a decent theme to it, but it doesn't look like a zombies map. It doesn't have any sort of design choices that let you know you're playing a zombies map. This could very easily, like I said, be put into a campaign or have the same sort of aesthetic used in a multiplayer game, and people wouldn't be able to tell the difference. There's no design choice here to let people know that they're playing a zombies game other than the zombies themselves. Now, in my opinion, it's really easy to just go off and say, wow, the newer Call of Duty zombies are a lot less scary than the ones that came before it. But then this poses the question, when did this trend sort of start? We can see this sort of trend happening in games as far back as BO3. In this video, that's obviously not mine. Shout out to Rozdavas for making this. But this video shows the comparison between the Black Ops 3 version of Kino der Toten and the original. And you can easily tell the Black Ops 3 version is way more lit up. And this is something that really irked me when I played the remaster. It has a completely different vibe than the original Kino der Toten. The outdoor area stays pretty true to the original, but the indoor area it feels completely different. They completely illuminated it with yellow lighting. I don't know why they felt they needed to do this, but it really just makes the game feel a lot less scary. The original auditorium was not lit up at all, and in the Black Ops 3 version they decided to just plaster a bunch of lights everywhere for some reason. I don't know why they decided to do this. I say the game still feels pretty scary, and it still has that very zombies brutal aesthetic to it, but it's definitely not where it was originally. So yeah, I don't really think there's any game in particular we can point to and say zombies stopped being scary here. I think it's more of it's sort of followed a trend of it becoming less and less scary and having less and less of a darker tone. If you were paying attention earlier, you might have remembered that I said there's a zombies map in one of the more recent Call of Duties that still manages to maintain a dark and sort of scary aesthetic, but it's also in the daytime outside, and that's no other than D Machine and Cold War Zombies. Despite being daytime, this map feels very dark, gloomy, and has a very brutal aesthetic to it. It starts you off next to this concrete destroyed structure that has been abandoned for a long time. There's graffiti all over it, and it's very destroyed on the inside. And typically after that, you'll make your way down into the bunker, a very dark and brutal area with blood splatters everywhere. It's very scary and very creepy down here. Your character will even utilize a flashlight to illuminate the dark areas. To me, this map is great, and compared to recent maps, they look terrible compared to this one. I love D Machine. I think it's a great installation to the series, and I love Cold War Zombies as a whole. Most of the maps, with the exception of Firebase Z and a lot of the like Warzone style zombie maps, are great in that game. I love Cold War Zombies. I think it's like I said, great addition. Cold War to me really demonstrates that Call of Duty can have a modern title that is able to maintain the dark themes and creepy aesthetics of the original zombies. I think that's enough about the modern zombies. I think I've really drived in my point that the recent titles really don't have any theming or tone that indicate they're a zombies game to me. But let's take a look at the older titles and see how they compare. For the first map, I'm going to show one that we've probably all played or at least have heard of, and that's Kino der Toten. There's a lot of elements that go into this map that I think drive home the fact that this is a scary sort of map. The first of which being that it's just a dark design. It's very dark, it's very gloomy, everything's very abandoned looking, it's very brutal looking. Everything about it just shows that it's kind of scary, it's very dreary. And you can really see this through the spawn room. The only light that's really coming in is through some boarded up windows on the wall. The map also has a lot of destroyed rubble on the ground, a lot of blood splatters on the wall, and just a lot to show that this place is run down and also very horror oriented. but a lot of this just kind of has to do with the overall feeling and tone of the map. Something that actually really scared me on this map when I played it recently were the hellhounds, the dogs that come in around round 6 on this map. The reason these dogs scared me was because of sort of how they work in this game. When the dogs spawn in, they kind of roam around in your direction until they catch sight of you, and then they'll start running after you. And the reason why I say this is scary is because one can spawn a few rooms over, and then another will spawn next to you, and you'll start fighting the one next to you, and then more will spawn in your direction, and then you completely forget about that one that spawned in the room a few rooms over. And because they slowly just sort of roam in your direction, you aren't really aware of that one anymore. So the dogs, in my opinion at least, can easily jump scare you if you're not paying a lot of attention to the game. The dogs in Black Ops 1 are also just a lot more harder to kill compared to a title like Black Ops 3 where they go down in just a few hits. In this game you actually have to put a fair amount of shots into them before they die. Which sort of brings me to my next point, and that the map is actually very unforgiving. By unforgiving, I mean you go down in a lot less hits compared to any recent Call of Duty, and that's 2 without Jug. The reason I think this adds to the scary vibe of the game is because you're going to be a lot more stressed out about dying compared to a more recent title where you can tank a lot more hits. Considering without Jug you can only go down in 2 hits, you're going to be a lot more scared of just being hit once. Another aspect of this map that really drives home the scariness is the things the map makers implemented just for the sake of adding to that scary vibe. For example, there's this box in the dressing room where if you walk past it, you can hear someone banging inside of it, like there's a zombie or even a person trapped inside. And like whenever I walk past this, it always just like gives me the chills because like just know the thought of that can be like scary. Honestly, I'm just gonna say I think that Black Ops 1 has the best audio design out of any Call of Duty Zombies game of all time. Not just because of the stupid box clip, I'll get into the specifics more in just a bit, but I mean this clip alone, the screams of the zombies in the background and the ambient sound really mashes together to create an amazing piece of ambience and just sound design. I just don't think any other zombies game has been able to top the sound design of Black Ops 1, at least for me personally. Piggybacking off of the sound design, when you turn on the power, it's really emphasized to the player through the sound design. Not only do you have that infamous sound of the teleporter firing up, but you can also hear the screams and roars of the Nova 6 crawlers above you on the roof as they break down through the ceiling. Combine this with the already peak sound design of Black Ops 1 Zombies, and I think that this, hands down, is one of the best sounding moments in the entire game.
Somehow, becoming more my honor, bigger than yours.
The game has made a situation like turning the power on where you expect to get all these new perks that'll make it easier feel even more difficult and scary because now the Nova crawlers have broken through the roof, emphasized by the amazing sound design. I'd say that's enough talk for Kino der Toten. I want to move on to another map, and as you probably guessed, this one's Moon, like from the intro. Like I said in the intro, Moon was the map that probably scared me the most as a kid. To understand why this map makes you feel so uneasy, you'll have to look at the area you start in. The game places you in this military base called Groom Lake. It's probably just Area 51, but there's a giant teleporter in front of you, and you're basically just in this sort of wide open space. And at first, it just feels like your normal round 1. The zombies are just slowly walking towards you, but then this happens. Now, for everyone that's probably played this game, you probably just came to expect that. But imagine hearing this for the first time. The zombies are slowly walking towards you, then some loud alarm blares over you, and then they all just start running full sprint at you. And hellhounds start spawning in. It's crazy. Not to mention, the feeling is already like pretty tense when you spawn in. There's like a constant like alarm going off and like sort of bell ringing, which kind of adds to this like vibe that you're really not supposed to be there. And it like, I feel like the game is trying to tell you with its audio that it wants you to leave this area. It doesn't want you to stay here for a long time. Sort of adding on top of to that blaring alarm sound, every time you hear it again after the first time, it indicates a new round has gone by. So every time you hear it, the zombie's health will increase to however many times the alarm rang. So if the alarm rang 4 times, then the zombies would have the same amount of health they would as on round 4. This is just a great way to incorporate some like sort of creepy audio element into the game world itself. But if you play the game like you're meant to and leave the area as the game is desperately trying to tell you to with the teleporter at the front of the area, then it teleports you onto the moon.
The doctor is almost.
Now, in my opinion, Moon is one of my lesser favorite maps just in terms of gameplay. I think it has great audio and sort of scary elements built into it, and I'll get into that in a bit. But I think in terms of gameplay, this map's kind of lacking. The zombies have zero gravity, which makes them slower, and there's a lot of times where you won't know where the last zombie is, and it's slowly making its way towards you across the map, which can make the game feel a bit like a slog. Aside from that, this map plays with the audio super well, and I'll get into that. When you have the helmet on, you can barely hear anything. I guess it'd be more accurate if you couldn't hear anything at all, but whatever, it's just a game. One of the more scarier elements of this is the spaceman that will randomly spawn in, and I'm pretty sure its name will have like the name of somebody you played with previously, I think. At least as a kid, this dude scared me so much. He has these like weird noises when you approach him, and he just slowly sort of makes his way towards you, like slower than the zombies, and he's just like a very ominous figure. And when he finally makes his way to you, he like grabs you and like headbutts you and then like teleports you to another spot on the map. Another aspect of pretty terrifying sound design that happens on this map happens after the fact when you turn on power. And I get it, you know, oh, you turn on power, some scary sound happens, but this one's a little different from Kino. Basically, when you turn on power, it adds a bunch of oxygen to areas that are sort of, I guess, enclosed or have like an airlock in them. So like the spawn area and different areas throughout the map. Due to the presence of oxygen, you can hear again in this once pretty silent area. So the developers really decided to play on this and really emphasize the sound through 2 ways. First being the barriers are metal instead of wood, which actually plays into the sound design a lot because you can hear the zombies rip the metal barriers off, which echoes throughout the room. And the second way is through adding, I think, just a bunch of reverb to the rooms with oxygen. Your gunshots and the zombie screams, and I think this is just to really emphasize the audio here, and it ends up creating a more scary and stressful tone because everything's much louder and echoey. In that audio clip, you can hear a lot of things. You can hear the barriers being broken by the zombies. You can hear gunshots. You can hear the footsteps and screams of the zombies. It's a great way to emphasize the sound in a once basically audio barren land. I think this is a very amazing use of sound design. And the last bit of sound design I'm going to talk about. I know I keep yapping about sound design, but I mean, it's just so good in Black Ops 1. I have to talk about it. Is the sort of ambience in the map. It has this sort of like lunar or sort of space tone to it, but it also like makes you feel like really empty and alone in like space. It's like very creepy. I don't know. The pitch of the ambience that's playing constantly feels like it's sort of rising, and it really sort of adds to the suspense, I guess. And combine this with the constant breathing in your suit, and it creates a very like unnerving tone. With all that said, that's pretty much everything I wanted to mention in terms of sound design for Black Ops 1. Other than the sound design, this map does a great job with the visuals and making you feeling like you're in a sort of suspenseful, lonely moon base, possibly gone wrong through the zombies. There's bloodstains everywhere, and everything kind of just feels empty, and I think that was kind of intentional. It really just makes the map feel vast and sort of scary and suspenseful. I think that sums up just about everything I want to say about the Call of Duty Black Ops 1 Zombies maps. So my conclusion is this, and it's that yes, Call of Duty has definitely made a trend to where it's became less scary and less creepy in the coming years. It has strived away from the artistic choices that have sort of added to the creepy and scary tone. That's not to say that all maps made in the recent years are not scary. For example, D Machine is a great map that was made recently that is pretty scary in my opinion. But generally speaking, the more recent the Zombies map, the less likely it is to be sort of scary and have artistic elements that make it feel creepy and sort of scary. So my final verdict in this section is that yes, the Call of Duty devs have definitely taken an initiative to make the game feel a lot less scary. But I also want to move on to a second point, and that's that did these games just seem a lot scarier to us than they actually are now? Because a lot of us were younger when we played them. So generally speaking, a lot is going to be scarier for us when we're younger. And let's kind of look into that. Now I'm going to try and answer the question of whether or not these games only seem scary because we played them when we were younger. And at that time, a lot more was scary to us than what is now. Now, I'm going to be honest. My immediate answer to this is yes. For example, take the guy in the spacesuit on Moon I was talking about earlier. He used to scare me so much as a kid. But now, I honestly could care less. He's probably more of a nuisance than anything. But I mean, back then, that guy was actually scary to me. And so, looking back, I was probably looking at that map thinking it was a lot scarier than it actually was. But there is something I have noticed. For example, the reason why I spoke about the audio choices so much is because I didn't notice them as a kid. They didn't really scare me as much, but I mean, now I definitely can see that creepiness factor come from them. So now I definitely think that there's some things that are like scary now that weren't necessarily scary to me back then, just because I didn't really fully understand the implications of whatever I was seeing or hearing on the screen. Another potential reason for the game seeming to be scarier back then is maybe because a lot of us were playing on CRT televisions, which have a lot more vivid colors making a blurrier image and also more true darks. So games could have seen a lot more realistically darker than they actually were on like a LCD monitor, for example. This is only a theory. I don't really have anything to back up what I'm saying. I'm just sort of spitballing here. But games on a CRT generally produce more blurrier images, which create, I want to say, like a more vivid picture with more true darks and blacks. This definitely could have added to the horror aspect, creating a more scarier tone to what is already a scary environment. But again, this is just a theory, nothing more than that. I don't even have anecdotal evidence to support this because, I mean, how would you even gauge this? This is just something I simply wanted to drop in because I thought it might have some relevance here. Additionally, when doing some research on this topic, I've seen people say that older games kind of are in this uncanny valley, which makes them scary. Sort of how like the less you see or the more the graphics leave to your imagination, the more scary a game is. But I feel like by the 7th generation of consoles, which is the Xbox 360, PS3, and I guess the Wii to an extent, by then the video game graphics have definitely gotten to a point where they weren't really in this uncanny valley of weirdness. I feel like that was left behind after the GameCube and PS2 and original Xbox days. Even the previous generation of consoles, so the Xbox, PS2, and GameCube, I feel like by then we're already making it past that uncanny valley point. Honestly, I don't really think these claims have that much weight here. However, I'm not really well versed in this topic as I'm not really too much aware of the various strengths and weaknesses of 7th generation consoles in regards to video game graphics. So maybe there was some limitations that made the game seem a bit scarier and left some things up to your imagination, but I don't think I'm one to speak on that. As a kid, some other things that scared me was the Panzer robot on Origins. I remember playing that on Black Ops 2. I remember whenever he'd come down from the sky, I'd always freak out. But I don't know if I was necessarily scared of the robot himself or just me dying to him, because let's be honest, I probably wasn't that good. Regardless of the fact, I still remember being pretty scared of him. For me, it was like one or two few things that really made me a lot more scared of the games as a kid. Just like specific things I can remember. I'm sure there was more things that I'm sure I've just forgotten as time has progressed. But let me know if there's anything that scared you as a kid or when you were younger when playing the old Call of Duty Zombies. Because like for me, like I remember like the Moon Dude and Panzer from Black Ops 2 were like the big ones that I remember being scared about. But yeah, that just about sums up everything I had to say for whether or not these games seem scarier because we were a lot younger. I thought it'd be more, if I'm gonna be honest, but I think I got all my thoughts out for that right there. So yeah. So anyways, now I kind of want to segue into my final verdict of, were these games scary because we were younger when we played them, or did they really take an initiative to make them seem more scary with a specific art direction? So what's the final verdict? Is it the developers choosing a theme or artistic style that's generally less scary, or were we just kids and it seemed a lot scarier back then? Well, it's probably no surprise to you. I hinted at it even in the intro, but in my opinion, it's both. But if it makes you feel any better, I definitely think that most of it can be attributed to the developers taking an approach that is a lot less thematically and artistically sort of creepy or scary, because there's a lot of artistic effects that I'm able to point to in the older Call of Duties that I can point to and say, yeah, this was probably done to make the game feel a bit scarier. And I just find it a lot harder to find those points with newer ones. And it's a lot harder to gauge what was scary and how scary it was when we were kids. I feel like a lot of the things we find scary when we were kids are honestly just random things. What might have been scary to one of us when we were a kid would be completely not scary to another person, and vice versa. But generally, I do think it is a pretty mixed bag. The way I see it is that if you take a map like Kino or Mob of the Dead, you'll be able to point out a lot more thematic choices that create a more scary, dark, or sort of creepy atmosphere when compared to a map like Liberty Falls that has very little done in terms of making it scary and sort of have a dark and creepy atmosphere. But yeah, that's basically just my 2 cents on this whole thing. If you have a different perspective, please feel free to share it in the comments, because this is just what I personally think and was able to come up with various reasons for when playing these games. An outsider perspective would be greatly appreciated. That just about sums up this video, so if you enjoyed it or found it informative in some sort of way, I really appreciate it if you dropped a sub or left a like. It'd help out a lot. That's just about all I wanted to cover, so with all that said and done, later.